Let's start with the least deadly and work our way towards the job that basically guaranteed you wouldn't make it to 40. Number 5. The fuller. In medieval Europe, wool was everything. It was used for clothing, blankets, and trade, and the demand for it was enormous. But before wool could be used, it had to be cleaned and thickened, and that's where the fuller came in. The process was simple. You took the raw wool, placed it in a large vat, and then you walked on it for hours, sometimes entire days. Now you might be thinking, that doesn't sound so bad, and you'd be right if the vat was filled with water. It wasn't. The most effective liquid for cleaning and thickening wool turned out to be human urine. Aged human urine, to be specific. Fullers would collect buckets of urine from the entire town, let it sit for days until it fermented, and then climb in and get to work. The ammonia in the urine broke down the grease in the wool and bonded the fibers together. It worked perfectly. The people who had to wear the wool preferred not to think about this. The fuller himself developed chronic skin conditions, respiratory problems from the fumes, and a reputation that made it very hard to find a spouse. Number 4, the leech collector. Medieval medicine was not great. Doctors of the time believed that most illnesses were caused by an imbalance of fluids in the body, and the solution was simple. Remove some of the fluid, specifically the blood, and the most efficient way to do that was with leeches, thousands of them, which meant someone had to go get them. The leech collector's job was to wade into swamps, rivers, and marshes, roll up their trousers, and simply wait. The leeches would attach themselves to their legs, and once enough had latched on, the collector would carefully remove them and sell them to doctors and apothecaries. Now, losing a bit of blood to a few leeches doesn't sound immediately fatal, and it wasn't. What killed leech collectors was everything else living in the swamps. Infections from open wounds were common and often fatal. Waterborne diseases were constant companions. And in some regions, collectors waded through waters that carried parasites that burrowed into the skin and attacked organs. The pay was terrible, the working conditions were terrible, and the leeches didn't care either way. Number 3, the gong farmer. Every city in medieval Europe had one thing in common: thousands of people, all of whom needed to use the bathroom. The bathroom, in this case, was a large pit beneath the city called a cesspit, and every few months, someone had to climb down and empty it. That someone was the gong farmer. They worked exclusively at night, which tells you everything you need to know about how the rest of the city felt about them. They were paid relatively well by medieval standards, which also tells you everything you need to know. Armed with shovels and buckets, gong farmers descended into cesspits that hadn't been emptied in months. The methane gas that built up in these pits was enormous, and a single spark or open flame could cause an explosion. Several gong farmers died exactly this way. Others simply drowned, not in water. Those who survived long enough to retire did so with permanent lung damage and a smell that no amount of washing could fully remove. They were not allowed to live within city walls. Number 2, the plague doctor. By the time the Black Death arrived in Europe in 1347, nobody really knew what it was, where it came from, or how to stop it. Enter the plague doctor. These were physicians hired by towns to treat the sick during outbreaks, and they are perhaps the most recognizable figure of the medieval period, thanks to their iconic costume: a long waxed coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and a beaked mask filled with herbs and flowers. The beak was believed to filter out the bad air that was thought to cause the plague. It did not. Plague doctors walked directly into homes filled with dying people, examined them, attempted various treatments, none of which worked, and then moved on to the next house. Some treatments included applying dead animals to the swellings, draining the buboes with a knife, and, in at least one recorded case, rubbing a live chicken on the infected areas. None of these helped. Around 1 in 3 Europeans died during the Black Death. Many of the plague doctors hired to stop it died alongside their patients. They knew the risks. They showed up anyway. Some for the money, some because it was the right thing to do. Either way, it didn't end well. Number 1, the executioner. At first glance, the executioner might seem like a relatively safe job. You weren't wading through sewage. You weren't inhaling methane gas. You weren't catching the plague. You stood at the front of a crowd, did your job, and went home. The problem was everything else. Executioners were considered so morally corrupt by medieval society that they were banned from entering most buildings. Churches, taverns, shops, they were not allowed to touch food in the market. If they wanted bread, they had to point at it and the baker would set it aside. They were forced to live outside city walls, wear specific clothing so people could identify them and move away. And in many regions, they were legally barred from marrying into any respectable family. The job itself was also more dangerous than it looked. A clean execution meant the crowd went home satisfied. A botched one, where the condemned suffered longer than expected, could, and often did, result in the crowd turning on the executioner. Several were beaten to death by angry mobs for doing their job poorly, and yet the role was often hereditary. Father passed it to son, because nobody else would take it, and the family needed to eat.